Hey, everybody, this is Travis Fritz. Welcome to Trust in the Process, a podcast that I'm doing from Old Nation Brewing Company about the beer industry. It has evolved into something that seems to particularly be for young people thinking about coming into the industry, or people of any age thinking about coming into the brewing industry as creators, as brewers. And so today I'm happy to have an old colleague of mine, Oliver, come on the show. Oliver, please introduce yourself fully as you are today so that I don't get anything wrong.
Hey, everybody. My name is Oliver Roberts. I am the co-owner and I guess formerly trained brewmaster of Five Shores Brewing in Beulah, Michigan. I am traditionally a lager brewer. Was formerly the brewmaster at Wolverine State Brewing in Ann Arbor. And we are just now getting into our third summer here at Five Shores. So, I learned a lot from Travis and some talks at Michigan Brewing Company, and that's where I met Travis for the first time. So
that's right. Well, we can get into that, I suppose, but it's a dicey conversation with a lot of non-NDAs,
Yeah, okay.
But no, it's okay. There really aren't that many anymore. So you said 3 years now at Five Shores.
Correct.
Which means that you opened how long before the pandemic?
7 weeks. January 24th, 2020, Northern Michigan. No one's here. It's snowy and quiet, and the tap room behind me was packed for 7 weeks, almost 5 nights a week, and then, COVID.
Yeah. So do you have any sense, you're in Benzie County, you said before when we were talking?
Yeah, we're in Benzie.
Do you have any sense of what the population density there is like?
The last census was like around 18,000 people in the county. And I believe in the village of Beulah, there's about 400 year-round residents.
Awesome. And then, so that was my next question. How does that change in the summer?
There's Crystal Lake is the 9th largest inland lake in Michigan, and that's just kind of that way, which has over 1,100 homes on it. So that all explodes, come a couple weeks before Memorial Day, and COVID has brought more people to the area year round, working remotely, younger people, kind of our age-ish, but it's still it's an older year round community, but it's, a lot of agriculture, a lot of rural areas. We're about 30 minutes from Traverse City. So, we're not too far from a population density, but it's quiet in the off months.
Well, and I guess that's kind of maybe some perspective about the pandemic too. I mean, I know, buddies that I have that have breweries in Detroit seem to be affected by the pandemic, not worse, not better necessarily, but differently than, friends that I have like yourself who are in more rural areas, and myself. I mean, we're in a relatively rural area too. Even though we're in the southern part of the state near Lansing, it's still a relatively small community that's sort of it's just a small town. So, yeah. My experience was different than the guys in the Southeast Michigan area, was different than the folks who were in West Michigan, tends to be different than the folks in Northern Michigan. What did you see with regard to folks' perspectives where you are about the pandemic and how they treated kind of going out and hanging out? And what did you guys allow? What was it like in that regard?
It was definitely a weekly business model change in terms of retail, right? 2 summers ago, the demand was so pent up from that first summer after in 2020. That was a pretty cool thing to see, as a new business and getting back into the swing of things. Just the demand and all the new faces. Last summer was a little bit looser. This last fall and winter with the variants that came in, it really, I think, hurt retail and hospitality across the board. Plus everyone back in the office, back at school, it kind of changed these shoulder seasons. It was always different up here though, too. I mean, a lot of outdoor space, not as many people packed together. So there was a lot less, I think, anxiety around the pandemic. And I would say, to some degree up here, it feels like it's over. Even though all evidence and facts to the contrary, you're up here to be outside, not to pack yourself into tight spaces for the most part. So
And having said that, I see now, so that everybody knows, I mean, I'm old, so I was probably more fooled by this than anybody else, but I couldn't tell until I saw the umbrellas move whether or not your background was a static kind of, it's so very picturesque, and it looks like you have a gigantic patio there. Is that the case, or is it?
Yeah, we do. We have a pretty big outdoor,
Holy balls.
27 picnic tables.
Wow.
I think we've gone through about 40 umbrellas in the last 2 summers because of the wind off the lake. So just break them. I mean, disposable umbrellas. So if anyone's got a patent for an unbreakable umbrella, I will pay top dollar.
I'm sure somebody does.
Yeah,
I'm sure somebody does.
Yeah, DM
everybody's got something. So now this building is purpose built, or is this a building that you bought? I'm looking at it here.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the hardest, when you're starting a brewery, location is kind of every business. But I mean, putting ourselves in a seasonal rural area was part of, personal thing for me to be up here, closer to family. And the building has actually been vacant for over 30 years when we bought it.
What was it? I mean, it looks like a hangar or something.
Yeah, so that's called a Quonset style. I'm still trying to figure out my weatherman.
Sure, like you got
that domed roof.
It's backwards.
Yeah. Okay. It was originally an Oldsmobile dealership back in the 50s. And then it was a like a service station. And I don't know if there was ever pumps here, but then it was a repair shop. So we basically built and I thought this was more picturesque for the podcast. Inside there, Ellie's making beer today and it's kind of loud. But we built a building inside of a building.
Okay.
And in hindsight, if the building wasn't so attractive, I would have much rather built something from the ground up, just because if, old buildings, nothing's level, nothing, you don't have any idea why this thing was that way. What's stuck in the plumbing, wrenches, animals, who knows? So
the depth of the concrete.
The concrete, I mean, there was literally a flowing well inside of the building that was like in a 9-foot pit that was just running when we bought the building. And it took me 6 months just to find someone to pump concrete down the well and stop it and then fill that pit with concrete. So that was actually like the most stressful part of this, was like, I need to fill a hole.
Yeah.
But I mean, the building and the community was very welcoming. Beulah had for a long time had been a kind of an economically stagnant, if not depressed, small little village. Frankfort, Michigan, which is kind of a booming beach town, had taken off with Storm Cloud Brewing opening up there. I want to say 7 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And that town really kind of came up. And I think, Travis, breweries have a ability to reinvigorate, the commerce in small areas.
They do.
And neighborhoods and things.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, like we're here, as I said, like in a bedroom community, right? It's kind of a suburb of Lansing. It was one of the last suburbs of Lansing,
Yeah.
And therefore, like one of the first kind of suburbs of even Detroit. It's a weird transition. But what we have is the ability to drop a brewery into a place, for example, when you're that close to a relatively large population center, and folks are saying, oh, well, that town seems cooler now than it used to. So let's move 10 miles from where we are to where that place is, because property values start to increase and all that sort of stuff, which is wonderful. But I guess in a place like, and Beulah, I guess, is not that much farther away from Traverse City than we are from Lansing. But I wonder if you said that during the pandemic, you had a lot of people that are working remotely, younger people that have moved up there, which is nuts to me, right? I mean, that's insane.
Mostly people that grew up here and were living in Chicago, and more bigger cities or suburbs of bigger cities, and they grew up here and they came back because their job was remotely. Their parents are still here, so. And these are like our peers, these are people in their mid 30s to, mid 40s.
So you're saying not retirees, essentially?
No, not no retirees working. A lot of people retired during the pandemic, right?
Not young, but not retired.
Yeah.
So Well, to talk a little bit about that too, and we'll get into brewing, here at some point. But one of the things that always is relatively remarkable to me, although it shouldn't be, and I think from the perspective of someone that lives up there, it's absolutely not, is the particularly as you go up the west coast of Michigan and the farther north you get, oddly, and Traverse City might be a little bit of an exception to this, but say, Harbor Springs or whatever, even Petoskey, you see these, there's a pretty high concentration of Chicago-centric stuff, right?
Yeah.
So if you're seeing a sports team, it's as likely or more likely to be the White Sox as it is the Tigers, for example, right?
Yeah.
Or the Cubbies. So, you're not from there, right? So what have you noticed? Or
so I'm from Ann Arbor, and I had no idea what Benzie County even was. Like, it was a drive through to Storm Cloud, because we actually bought Storm Cloud's old system when they built their new production facility. So I was coming through and saw the building, but I was like, no way, like there's no one here. This is the worst idea ever. And that was in the winter, and then I saw it in the spring and was like, oh, look at all the people, all the boats. It's really pretty. So I actually think the Chicago people skip this area and they go up to south of here, Manistee, Ludington, down to Muskegon, south, all those places. Yeah, it's all Illinois license plates. There's a lot of history of families coming up here from the Detroit area, and also St. Louis. Oddly enough, I'm not sure how that. Yeah, a lot of St. Louis people, and funny enough, when I moved up here and started putting things out on social media for the brewery, I had a slew of people I grew up with, and were like, oh my gosh, we've been going there for 30 years. My family's had a house on Crystal Lake for, 50 years. So it was weird that I'd never heard of it. And it's interesting in that regard, but I always see familiar faces, probably every week during the summer. There's someone who's like, oh yeah, we're up, we have family friends over here, or our family has a house, or we wanted to come to the brewery, but we've been coming to this area forever. So Benzie is kind of a hidden gem. Yeah. I would say that for sure. It doesn't get a lot of attention. It's kind of unknown to a lot of people.
Well, as a very young man, as a kind of an itinerant musician and not a brewer and without any kids or whatever, I spent a lot of time up north in Michigan, particularly on weekends or whenever I could get away. And now this is 20 some years ago, right? 22, 23 years ago. Or maybe 25. But I guess, my point here is what I didn't know about Northern Michigan. And of course, now everybody knows. But what I didn't know at that time about Northern Michigan was that there were these pockets around Torch Lake, Walloon Lake, even Crystal Lake, I think, Lake Charlevoix, these pockets of like extravagant wealth, right?
Yes. Quiet money.
Quiet, right? But just this, these estates that you'd imagine might be in England, they're amazingly, they're just gorgeous pieces of property that are, worth millions and millions of dollars. And I think particularly for me, Walloon Lake and Lake Charlevoix are like that, but obviously gorgeous lakes, right? You would expect that people with money would find these and go, okay, we want these. That's for us. But particularly back then, and again, 20, 25 years ago, and I think it's true now too, but maybe a little bit less so, it was these pockets of extravagant wealth that were completely surrounded by, in some cases, relatively grinding rural poverty. And there wasn't a lot of go-between. So there were, in city council meetings and things of that nature, this constant friction between, folks who had maybe moved up there or had their vacation home up there with a great deal of power and wealth, and then people who were trying to scrape by and raise their families up there who didn't have any of that. Yeah. And who does the community serve and why and in what way and where is the balance? And it seems to me in the last 25 years that more of a balance has been struck. But I'm not up there, so I don't really know. What do you think?
I mean, that's actually touches on a few decent points. I mean, I think as much as tourism is going to be like this area's main focus, the hard part is not understanding how places like Charlevoix, Petoskey, I don't know the history of why those places boomed. What was the thing 120 years ago that people settled there and they were more progressive in how they built communities. Because I mean, this area, and there's the interesting history to Crystal Lake that maybe we'll get into, but the biggest challenge I think communities like Beulah and Benzie and all around is the affordable housing issue, which is nationwide, but even in these rural communities where there are businesses opening, small businesses, it's the Airbnb VRBO factor. Outside people buying up houses and renting them, buying them above, way above asking, and they're sitting empty for a good portion of the year. It's really taken the ability for people to move up here and live off of a livable wage and buy a house. So that's a struggle here, and I don't think that the communities are doing enough to try to you don't want to hinder those things, but people coming in and giving people rentals, having people afford places to stay up here. But then the double-edged sword is where the worker's going to live.
Right.
If you're having more businesses and I say I didn't start a business so I could work more. And so far that hasn't been able to work out, but it's so that's a struggle, I think, is that side of it is houses that were once very much affordable for a single family getting going in a beautiful place that are no longer available because someone or a group of people have started buying up houses and turning them into rentals.
Right. And of course there's no immediate solution for that, right? Once a house is bought, it's bought.
No, and also in a rural community like this, there's no infrastructure. Right. There's no sewage systems to tap into. There's septic wells, which is all doable. But, if you want to move to this area and buy a piece of land and build a house, I mean, that type of infrastructure and utilities costs a lot. I mean, propane heat, they are expanding things like natural gas in this area, and broadband is making a big headway up here, which obviously is big for people, making sure that if they want to settle here, that there is access to information in that regard. But my dream would be that businesses like Five Shores and other new ones that can service the community year round will help potentially find developers that do want to put in affordable housing at some place. I mean, I don't necessarily want to see big suburban neighborhoods pop up, but we also kind of could use, $220,000 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes in a little neighborhood. That would be really nice to see.
Sure. Well, and I mean, again, it's different, of course, but, we see in old towns that are, roughly the same age as the towns up there, right? So industry in Michigan kind of all started everywhere in the state at the same time, right? They were logging up north. There was, factories down here. So, people were running to places they weren't in order to get in on that work around the same time. And in this community, Williamston, which is a relatively small community, we see something really neat, which is essentially people who are moving into the town are moving really close to the downtown area. And of course, you have these estates that are, folks that are commuting to Detroit that are presidents and VPs of Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever that are in their kind of country estates. But largely the working class and kind of upper middle class folks are moving into the downtown area or kind of slowly expanding that downtown area out as opposed to establishing their own kind of subdivision pockets and all that sort of stuff. There is a little bit of that, but mostly it is around the central town, which is great.
Are these new builds or is it renovation? Yeah. Okay. And I mean, and I think that's one of the issues in a community like this, where, we're kind of in a valley for a lake. So and there's not, some of the land is literally not usable to build a house on, just road access. I mean,
right.
It's funny, when you've grown up in a city and it takes you 20 minutes to go 3 miles, and then you come up here and there's one stoplight, but I'm like, the roads are built. They're not I don't think they're making any new roads.
Right. Right.
So
they're all squares. It's easy to figure out.
Yeah. It definitely, I think Five Shores, the way we opened with the marketing we did, the excitement around the brewery being here, our brand, what we were about, that momentum really got pulled out from under the rug with COVID. And I think our goal was to break the seasonal model. And unfortunately, like, everyone had to reset a little bit in that regard. So, you pivot and you figure out what to do. But I think we have now, for the foreseeable future, looking at a seasonal, we're a seasonal business. You make hay while the sun shines and figure out what to do. And luckily, I've met a lot of other hospitality business owners around here, and we share a lot, which is nice. It's not competitive. I think it is a rising tide lifts all ships in this area when it comes to hospitality. But I see why people close for 2 or 3 months in the winter. I see why they cut their hours down, and that's a hard pill to swallow when you're from a busy, highly populated area like Ann Arbor or even close to Lansing. I mean, you just have more people that are there all year round. Sure. And when I worked at Wolverine, fall and winter was the busy time. Summer's when it slowed, and down north. Yeah, the school year is a lot longer than the summer. So,
right.
So I'm still making peace with some of those realities and figure out what to do with the business. Kind of learning as you go, which I'm sure it's always a new thing that you gotta trying to look 10 steps ahead while you're still doing step 1.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, when you pivot, when you talk about, okay, well, we wanted to break the mold, but with the pandemic, that doesn't look as possible. So we have to kind of go back to doing what you do as a business owner all the time, or should do, which is look at the resources you actually have in reality and how you can exploit those resources to your and your people's benefit. That happens. It happens, in a different way to everybody for sure. But obviously part of doing that is reorienting your goals. So a couple things that I wanted to cover with you. First of all, you worked at Wolverine for a long time.
Yeah.
Wolverine is, for those folks who don't know, there may be, 8 or 9 people watching this and 1 or 2 of them might not know, that Wolverine came into, I'm going to say like around 2010. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
When the company was established, I think it says 2006.
Okay.
Is when the business was established. And I don't know when they started making the Wolverine beer up at, first they started at Liquid Manufacturing in Brighton and then moved to MBC, we'll call it. So yeah, that was in that like late 2000s.
Yeah. Right. So, then opened a facility, which you were, when we met, as you said, you were working at a Michigan Brewing Company and I was contracting at a Michigan Brewing Company at the same time. That was crazy, but it's, whatever. It's probably better not to get too much into that. And then you guys opened a facility. I don't see Oliver anymore, but I see this Wolverine beer in these brown bottles, as everybody was doing at the time, on the shelves. And, I know that you guys had a pub. I know that it did pretty well, but the goal of the brewery was to be a distributing lager-centric brewery. That's fair to say.
Basically, I mean, it was Michigan's first all lager brewery, I think. I mean, if you don't count something that was, a macro, Stroh's. Yeah.
Right. Stroh's. Yeah. I mean, but modern, right? Craft.
Yeah. Modern craft lager.
Yeah. So that is, as every brewer knows, a tough row to hoe, right? Even in Colorado today, that's a tough one to do. What was your experience? Okay, first of all, let me put this in the context of now.
Yeah.
So now you're at Five Shores, and you guys are not distributing and have no intention to, or you do, or it's a kind of maybe, or.
I think when you work in a production brewery and run a production brewery for long enough, you know how the numbers work. Now, granted, like I think it's brand specific. Like, sure. Not everyone's brand. You could have the best beer in the world. You could have great beer 100s everywhere, but if you're tent pole lager, whatever, picnic table lager, no one cares, then it doesn't matter if your beer is good. So
correct.
I think, Wolverine was definitely a benchmark for Michigan lagers, and the fact that like that was that we're doing it, like no deviating from lagers. I don't know if I want to do a production. We do small self distro draft. We've done some, we have a little tabletop canner that 24 cans, every 10 minutes. Great rate.
Yeah.
A lot of
It
labor.
here,
Yeah, they are counter pressure filled, so that's good.
that's good.
So some can releases, but honestly, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It's more of a marketing thing, right? It can be fun, but it's expensive and takes a lot of time. So, I think I am waiting for Five Shores to, things to settle out. First of all, if I was going to start a production brewery, who the heck's going to work there? Like, there's no one to work there. And I mean,
right.
So I don't know. I think that's definitely, I know how to do it, right? Like you do. I know how to build a brewery to be a production brewery that can be efficient, and keep costs low. But I've been away from the distributing market long enough where I'd have to really see if it's something I would want to figure out if the investment would be worth it. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you didn't ask, but it's nothing I would recommend to anyone. At the moment, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying you don't know what it's like. I'm saying, the last 3 or 4 years, dude, it's not what it was. And that's how Old Nation was. I was like, oh, I get to make some cool old classic beers, and they're happening this is 2015. They're happening on the East Coast. They're happening on the West Coast. They'll get here in Michigan. It's going to be great. By the way, all you really needed to do still at that time was make killer beer, put it in a cool package, and get it on the shelf in front of people, and they'd buy it, right? Up until then. But that was like the moment that changed, right? That was the moment that everybody was going to Untapped. Everybody started going to these craft beer enthusiast groups. That a lot of that is faded away. Untapped, maybe not as much, but a lot of the
influence and
a lot of the influence of those enthusiast groups has kind of waned. But man, it was like if you don't have those guys talking about you, you're just not going to do anything, right? Just because of the way the competition was. And so, it was a huge pivot in terms of competition. And now it seems like if you don't have an established flagship, which we're lucky enough to have, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I don't think I'd be able to. I don't think you can do it really.
No, and I think you said this was geared towards younger people potentially looking to get in the industry. And I mean, that's the thing is, the ego of a new brewer or someone who wants to own a brewery and loves their liquid and loves their ideas. And I remember that feeling. It has definitely turned into something else as a seasoned brewer. I mean, I've been home brewing for, been a brewer, I guess, if you say count home brewing, for about 21 years. Mm-hmm. So in a professional for about 15. So it's weird now, right? You've been doing it, but like now I'm a veteran, which is weird to say.
Yeah, it is.
But the ego is not the driving force to think that your beer is going to sell. Like it's just not. And there's a lot of luck involved. There really is. I mean, there are breweries that, the fact that like all you hear about is this person, that person, the online trade culture, the line culture. That is like got to be less than 0.5% of all the breweries that actually get that kind of noise. And there's some luck. I mean, good brand, good liquid, timing. Like you said, timing is huge.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think, luck is 9 times out of 10, luck is, as they say, where, preparedness meets opportunity. But, Lord knows I didn't think I was going to be putting my kids through college with a New England IPA. Right.
Yeah.
But here we are, and that's fine with me, right? As long as I'm making as good a New England IPA as I know how to do, then I'm okay with it. But again, I think it's reaching that. I don't know how at this late date you would absolutely. I think establishing hype, people coming into line up for your brewery. Really, that just takes a good brewer who's willing to do whatever noisy thing gets people's attention, right?
Yeah.
You can do that, but to actually get on the shelves and have a flagship, as flagships have been thought of for a long time, I'm sure there's a way to do it. I don't know how it would happen at this point.
No, but I mean, there's plenty of people, industry veterans, like 20 years older than us, that branched off from some of the big breweries back in the day. Magic Hat comes to mind.
Yeah, I talked to Mitch Steele a couple of weeks ago who did that, from Rogue.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And like I think that gives you definitely a lot of clout, but it's still not going to make you a millionaire right away.
No.
Like it's you can put all the marketing behind a beer and get it out on shelves, and if it doesn't pull, and I think that's the interesting thing about craft is that the brand not only needs to be solid and it needs to have a story, people have to identify it in a way that makes them feel like they are a part of something, that it's special, and that they want to share with people. And that's
Right.
there is no magic recipe for that. Like, I mean, you could put a marketing team and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it still doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right.
And especially with I don't know enough about the stats in the industry to see where things have transitioned in terms of on premise, off premise. I mean, obviously, I'm sure on premise is down considerably
Year to
still.
year.
Yeah. Which, but you got to play both. You got to play both games.
Well, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. And I hear this perspective. I don't go to guild stuff anymore. I don't really have anything to do with the craft brewer community in Michigan. I haven't for years. Just because that's kind of what it's become, is a lot of like, well, nobody can do this and I don't know how, and everybody that got successful is just lucky. I hear that all the time. And it's like, yeah, man, I guess, but also, it's, to me, it really seems like a risk tolerance issue generally, right? Assuming that, for example, to get M43 up and going, I spent $0 on marketing, no money, not any money at all, right? I spent 2 years of my life absolutely sucked into social media and stuff, which I now thankfully am completely out of. But, I didn't spend any money.
Yeah.
Except for on equipment to sort of follow demand up to, 20,000 barrels. And, and it's a relatively profitable style of beer. So what we saw initially was, okay, here's an opportunity for us to do what it is that we want to do. And more than anything, here's an opportunity for me to keep all these people who work for me that I made a promise to employed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know me well enough to know I was not trying to make an IPA at all, right?
Yeah. Lagers. You wanted to make.
I wanted to make continental beers and lagers, right? Beers that were interesting to me.
Yeah.
Now, it just so happens that New England IPA actually is interesting to me. But that's because it's a different, first I had to accept that it was valid and then to explore it and say, okay, well, how can we exploit that validity and make it as good a product as we can possibly be? But the point here is, I hear a lot of folks saying, well, there's just the guys at homes are just all hype and, transient, same thing. It's just all hype. And Old Nation got lucky with M43. And you're kind of like, man, it took me 16 years to be an overnight success, right?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is only luck. And I didn't mean to. Hopefully, I didn't think I was.
No, and I'm not focusing on you saying that. I'm saying that's something you hear a lot.
Yeah, your success. But that's the thing is like you're not just a home brewer that switched over and was making New England's in your basement because you couldn't get heady topper, and then you like hit it. Like you're a business person who also makes beer. Right. I think that's what you described to me back in the day when I was picking your brain for advice on how your career, trajectory goes and where your focus needs to be.
Yep.
Which, it steals a little bit of the magic out of being a brewer, but
you can always work for somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. The hype breweries, I don't know. I'm also I'm a bit of a purist, but when I, being a lager brewer at Wolverine and then coming up here and knowing like, well, I can make a good lager. So, and the water up here is incredible. So that's actually,
yes.
The beer the lagers I'm making here, and it's not to talk trash about Wolverine, are just far superior because of our water.
Yes.
Like right out of the ground. It is incredible. It's bare bones, like, a lot of hardness, but like very little mineral content. So the ability to build on water without having to have water treatment equipment is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And that also lends to, okay, so we can make all the lagers we want. And then we do focus on modern, hazy, New England, fruity IPAs, and that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that's something I didn't get to do for 10 years. So,
right.
And that has been fun to explore that range, getting out of the lager yeast segment. But still, I would say that 30% of our volume is our light lager.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
it is.
Well, and I mean, think about where you are and who's coming and all that stuff. Now, do you guys, this is a silly question, I feel like at this point, but do you guys have a restaurant as well at your pub?
Yeah, we have a kitchen. And actually, I should say that I basically run the kitchen now.
You do?
Yeah, I brewed for the first time in a year a few weeks ago because my brewer was out, and I did a cellar day, and it took me a bit to get my my feet wet again. But yeah, I mean, that's been the hardest thing is I've gone through a couple kitchen managers. Just it's hard to find people that want to treat take the ownership like you have it.
Right.
And we don't have a full service kitchen, no grill, no fire, no fryers. But I have a little bit of a food background too. So as I took that over when we opened, because I think you kind of have to start a brewery with food now. You can't just have a tap room unless you got a pizza shop like right next door.
Right. Which, well, if you're in a city, for example.
In a city, yeah. And food is easily accessible. But here, like if people are driving to come to you, you need to be able to get, they're going to buy that second or third beer. They need something to put in their stomach. So, and you know what? I will say that part of the thing I do like about being with the food right now is the instant gratification from a creative side.
Yes.
You're not, you want to try something new, go ahead and do it.
Buy ingredients, assemble ingredients, serve food.
Exactly. So that is something I've enjoyed.
Yeah. Well, we have, our restaurant here, my wife runs it, and I have absolutely nothing to do with it. Outside of, I pay bills and stuff, but I don't operate in it.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the right personality to do that, right? But it's like a full restaurant with, the majority, in terms of numbers, the majority of our staff is in the restaurant. We've got, 14 brewers working here in the brewery. 4 or 5, depending on how you slice it, salespeople, and then some 16 to 22, depending on the season, people working in the restaurant. And it's like everybody's always said, right? The restaurant is 10% of the revenue and 80% of the assay all the time, right? It just has to be, right? Because that's where you're interacting with folks and customers who can be great or horrible, or most of them are somewhere in the middle. So I guess here's something I was kind of thinking about, and it's a little bit outside and off topic, I suppose. But, I worked in downtown Detroit at the beer company down there forever.
Yeah.
And actually, it seemed like forever. It was only about 5 years. But so down there in Detroit at that time, and this is like, remember, like 2003 to 2008. That was when the Super Bowl happened downtown and the All-Star game happened downtown, and they put a ton of money into the downtown infrastructure of the city for those events, right? And so people started coming down, and the Necklace District was sort of instituted. But when we went down there, it was still, broken windows, Detroit, for the first couple years. And what we would get as a brew pub in Detroit in the early 2000s, so say 2004, 2005, were people coming in from the suburbs to be a part of that kind of Wild West lawlessness.
Yeah.
And it was insane, right, to deal with these people that were around there. I remember. Go ahead.
That was the Slows era too, like when Slows took off. I mean,
it was before even Slows, but before Slows. But I remember, this is just an example of what it was like. And this was not like an isolated incident. It's just the one that I always remember because it's kind of the funniest. I remember this is when you could still smoke in bars. And somebody had butted their cigarette in a built-in stainless steel. It was built into the wall, tiles in the bathroom, stainless steel trash can. And so there was a fire. A fire had started, and I was downstairs. It was late at night. I was brewing late or whatever. And they were like, Travis, there's a fire in the bathroom. Okay, so I got a bucket of water, I had handy, brought it upstairs. And as I was going to pour it into the trash can, I noticed there was a guy with his pants at his ankles, ass hanging out, with a bottle of ketchup in one hand, a squeeze bottle of mustard in the other hand, really trying to put the fire out by squeezing mustard and ketchup into it, right? These are the people we were dealing with at the time. And so I wonder, right? Given that story, if there is, and because they were essentially taking a vacation, it was like a Mad Max vacation in Detroit, right? But it was like a vacation, right? They were out of their element. Similarly, I know a lot of people that go up north for different reasons are trying to get out of their element as well. And I wonder if you feel that in the pub, right? When seasons change and different folks start coming up, not negatively necessarily, but if there is a change there.
The one thing that I've been able to do with Five Shores is get my staff trained and autonomous enough that I don't do a lot of front facing with customers. Okay. I'm great with customers, but like as I think running a brewery for 10 years, I would rather be the guy behind the curtain.
Yeah.
It's definitely it's different because it's almost like a blur. And I mean, obviously I'm not just completely gone from here, but you know, the patience wanes with people. The expectations are sometimes a little bit, they're not with reality of what they're getting here. We are a choose your own adventure brewery. It's bar service, you know, get a buzzer for your food. You got to pick up your food, no service staff. Like, come here. If you want to sit at an empty table with an empty glass for 3 hours, go ahead.
Right.
Like, we're good with that. So I think, you know, the biggest thing I wanted to, and then just kind of transitioning a little bit, was when I started coming up here and researching the market and going to different places, restaurants, breweries, bars, the service level was very much, people were like, you know, just another person here for something. It wasn't as very friendly. It wasn't very attentive. So our big thing here was making sure that, like, you know, service was number one. Like, people are here to have a good time. Give them a good time. Right. Like, you will be happier. Yes, this is a job. Like, you know, for everyone involved, it's not supposed to be easy. Right. So having that's one thing about our culture here that I think we really hit on the head. So, you know, if someone's got a problem, give them a beer. Right. You know, that costs us very little. If we screw something up, approaching someone, regardless of where their mind is at for that day, you know, give them some for free.
Yep. Yeah.
And that helps solve a lot of problems. I can't say I think when people come up here, it's less the Wild West. It's more the let's like escape from the Wild West. So I think we get a little more of a beachy, laid back vibe. Yeah. Rather than the ketchup bottle, mustard, pants and ankles scenario. I mean, we've had some incidents, but I don't know if I want to, like.
Well, and I don't mean, like, tell me the craziest thing. I just mean, like, that was so normal. I can't believe I still remember it. Right.
No. Yeah. No, that's that. I mean, and restaurants and bars are always interesting things happen under the influence of alcohol. And the good thing about breweries is that people tend to not have too much. It's hard to have too much. It's usually the people that were doing something really fun before, and then they have that last 8.5% double IPA that puts them over the edge, and then you don't know who's coming out, right?
Right. Well, I mean, you know, I hear you. So we're getting the Jimmy Buffett vibe as opposed to the Motorhead vibe.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be starting a metal brewery in Northern Michigan would be interesting. I wonder how it would do.
Would do okay.
So I got a question then. I mean, just transitioning, because I mean, I know we only have so much time left. What's your take on lagers? Because I mean, again, lagers are still at my heart. Do I love making a double IPA in 10 days with Norwegian yeast? And you know, I love that.
Yes.
It takes me back to Grizzly Peak days when I was making, you know, English ales with Ringwood in 7 days. I mean, Ringwood. Just diacetyl in a glass.
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be, right? You can't make a beer with Ringwood and not have it be diacetyl.
Yeah. They did. I mean, Duncan did switch to Essex as I was leaving, and I think that helped a little bit. But you know,
well, I mean, I used to work at Arcadia, man, for a while, so Ringwood is not near and dear to my heart either. But Yeah, what is my thought about lager? I mean, I still feel personally the same way that I did, years ago when you and I talked about it. So much, in fact, that my partner and I have probably spent upwards of $750,000 trying to push lagers on people, right? And say, well, you may like M43, but look, there's this whole other world of beer that maybe you haven't been exposed to. So maybe if you like Old Nation, try these. And what we get are people saying what they've always said about lager, right? I know that these are the best lagers I can make, and I know for a fact that means they're about as good as they're going to get. So, I'm giving it to folks, and they're saying what they normally say, which is meh, or I never knew lagers could be like this. I'm going to go out and buy a 4-pack of M43 because these guys are so great, right? Yeah. Which is all fine. But, we consistently churn through money every year putting out wit beer, which is not a lager, but a more traditional, continental beer. Oktoberfest, Helles, Vienna Lager. And I do these specifically super lo-fi, right? So the name of the Vienna Lager is Vienna Lager, right? My thought is the same as it's always been, right? Beer is a drink of the people. Lager is the most popular style of beer to this day in the world, as you know, and have talked about before. And for a brewer, it should be the most interesting style of beer, a kind of beer that you can make, because it focuses a lot more on the individual brewer and their skill set than it does, for example, the sales force or the marketing department or raw material selection or whatever. It does depend on raw material selection, but not that you are using the newest disco hop necessarily, right? But that you are getting the best version of a hop that's been around for 150 years, right?
Yeah.
So it has, to me, it is what it's always been, right? As an individual, I walk into Five Shores or wherever, and I sit down and I want a beer, right? So what beer am I going to get? I am going to get your lightest lager or lager analog to find out whether or not I'm going to get another beer at your place, right?
Yeah, well, and I think it was John Cole who was not really he's once said to me, IPAs are the general's chicken of breweries. And for me, it's like yes, it's how is their blonde, whether it's like you said, or their lager, and something else we thought about was like the lager renaissance resurgence has been on for 20 years. Right?
Yeah,
but the problem is yes, more breweries, craft breweries, small, large, are making a lager, but there's so many more breweries that yes, there are more lagers in craft, but there's also more breweries, so it doesn't change the overall percentage of how many beers are lagers in the industry. And when I go to a festival, which I don't go to festivals very often, I'm always like, I'm like, if someone's got a lager, I'm going to taste that.
Yep.
Because and you might have a bunch of other good beers, but my thing is, don't make it if you can't do it well.
Correct. Yeah. And I know if you know what you're doing by tasting your lager, and I know what you don't know you're doing by tasting your lager, and I know what you do know what you're, I do know what of the things that you're supposed to do, you understand by tasting your lager. And really, for me, it's a great indicator, right?
Yeah.
This person, and it's not just DMS and diacetyl, it is the minerality and the acidity and the yeast health and all that kind of stuff that you can taste. How concerned was this brewer about taking one malt, one hop, one yeast, and water and making the best product they can out of it? And that tells me everything generally that I need to know about that brewer or brewery. Or did they say, we're going to make a lager, but we're going to put it in a footer and we're going to dry hop it, right? That's cool. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But it is this motivation to say, okay, well, we need to do something to make some noise, right? And that's fine. People need to make noise, man. I get it, right? We are a brewery who sells a lot of beer, more or less the same amount every year, and it's profitable, and we've been doing it for 7 years, right? So we don't have the same impetus to make noise and do all that kind of stuff. But I think holding lager sacred for me, and saying, okay, it's going to look lo-fi. We're not going to make this huge deal out of it. We are going to let people come around to this beer as opposed to, do something that makes it not what it should be in order to get their attention, maybe is stupid, but I can afford to be stupid. And I think that that's what lager should be. I think it's the people's beer. It should always be.
Well, no, and I don't think that, for people that are thinking about making lagers or they're new to brewing, and there is no fear in trying it.
No.
But like, we have people that will literally walk in, and if we're out of our lager, they won't stay. Like,
Right.
They love it here, but like, I came for beer and a pretzel, and if you don't have the beer, I'm not going to get your pretzel. And so they give you that.
Right. Yeah.
And so our only mandate, my mandate for my brewer, Ellie, was we cannot run out of that beer this summer. I don't care if we're down to 4 beers on the menu this summer.
Right.
One of them better be local legend lager, and it better be a lot of it. And,
right.
It took, and we only have 3 10-barrel fermenters.
Jeez.
So that's one of the reasons why we use Norwegian yeast too.
Yeah.
Is just be able to have that quick turnover so we can make room for, for the 2 or 3 lagers I like to have on. But the simplicity of it, and I don't know, maybe let me know if you agree with this, lagers and the attention that people give to it, all those factors, this single malt, single hop, water, the brewer who sets up the right process and system, as long as someone's following that,
yeah,
in a good brewery, every beer should turn out well.
Yes, 100%.
So that's that's a thing with when I do taste a beer, a lager that seems muddled, I also wonder, okay, how do they treat the rest of their beer?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm saying, right? I mean, look, lager is about process. If you can't follow, and it's complicated, it can be complicated. It depends on where you are, of course, and what equipment you have, but it can be relatively complicated. But that's okay, right? It should be as complicated as is required to make this beer as pristine as it possibly can. I talk a lot about, and I've even talked in this podcast about, the difference between American craft ales and continental lagers being the difference between punk music and classical or jazz music, right? So punk music is all about what you're saying and how loud you're saying it and with what force, right? So, a lot of these, barrel-aged stouts and New England double IPAs and whatever are about absolutely punching somebody in the nose and saying, this is what it is, right? It tastes like grapefruits, straight up. That's what it is, right? Whereas a lager is more about not making any noise that falls outside of the symphony, right? In order to make sure that it comes across as one cohesive unit, that this beer tastes like beer first, right? Much like you'd say, you get a loaf of fresh baked bread, right? You don't taste that bread and go, oh, I really taste the flour in this, right?
Yeah.
Right? You smell it and you go, oh my God, that's bread, right? And then you taste it and you go, oh Jesus, that's the best bread I've had in so long. This is wonderful, right?
Yeah.
That's what lager is, right?
Well, and something bringing up like the barrel-aged stouts and big, beers that are 60% fruit puree. Like, I mean, I love the dynamics of a big beer. And someone who has layered things together and it's a sipper and I can sniff it. And it's going to take me 20 minutes to get through 10 ounces, maybe half an hour. But, as a seasoned brewer, turned business person, I look at beers like that and I'm like, I can throw tons of money at a big beer and I guarantee you're going to like it.
Yep.
Like, I can boil it for 24 hours. I can, I can fill my mash tun 3 times.
Source cacao from Peru.
And dump a bunch of like sugar down the drain if I'm doing mash on mash with no sparge. But that's it. Like, you are throwing money to make flavor, whereas lager is like, it doesn't cost a lot. The price is in all the time you put into understanding how those beers are made well from the get-go.
Right. How can the brewer tease it out? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that goes for most beers that are not hop forward, generally. So if you talk about like English milds or wit beers, or, what I mean, there are in ales, you have, you're getting different phenolic notes from a lot of different places. You might be adding in orange peel or coriander or whatever, but generally, again, you're building you're building a piece ultimately, right? Much like you would write, I think, a song or a book or an essay, right? You're saying, okay, well, all these things have to work together, and I have to introduce them. So your first, when you look at it, when you bring it to your lips, the aroma that has to set the stage for what comes next, and then the coda upon the finish has to sort of make it into this kind of circular experience where everything has been said about the beer, and it's up to the brewer to tease that out. Whereas, for example, like you said, if you're making a double mash first runnings imperial stout, that's fine, right? You're not really teasing anything out. It's not that it's not difficult, and it's not that it's not valid. It's just that it's a totally different angle, right? It's a different goal.
Yeah, the skill set is more about, how much money am I willing to spend on this?
Right.
But I do like your musical references. I myself am not a musician. Couldn't play chopsticks if you asked.
Right.
But something and I'm gonna tell this whole story. I'm not a huge fan of the Foo Fighters either. I maybe the early stuff, but they had a documentary on HBO. I don't know if you ever watched it. It was a great documentary. The music they made was terrible in my opinion.
I don't like it.
What's that?
I don't like it, but right.
Dave Grohl said in that documentary, he was like, they were trying to make this song and they're collaborating, and he got all mad because he's like, this doesn't sound like Foo Fighters. Like, that's not our sound.
Right.
And so the way I look at a brewery is I try, all of our beers have something about the way I have crafted and built recipes and learned that, like, Wolverine had a sound. Every beer, if you tasted it and you were someone who's had, you'd be like, that's a Five Shores or a Wolverine beer. And I've done the same thing at Five Shores. So I think that's an identity in the beer. Like, they're all should be very different, but there's something about them, the way you balance things in different styles, that give it that unique character. So anyone that's, looking to try to figure out, like, don't throw one of everything different at different things. Like, find the thing that makes your beer unique to you and your brewery.
That's right.
And the best brewers that you're going to hire are the ones that hear that sound that you've created. So when they start to come, if you give them the opportunity to come up with recipes, they can look over your recipe and say, this is the thing that happens in every one of these beers that makes it unique to that brewery.
Absolutely. So I guess the last question I'll ask you is about brewer culture, right? And somebody that's been brewing as long as you have, and friends of mine who've been brewing about as long as I have as well. We've seen kind of a market shift in terms of the brewer culture, and it's happened as competition has grown, and it's a normal thing. But wondering about the value of the brewer culture whenever I came into Michigan, which was, by the way, there were like 60 breweries in the state, that less, but and most of them aren't around anymore. But it really was inclusive. It really was about everyone sort of working together to make sure that there was a base of knowledge that new brewers had coming into the industry. New brewers coming into the industry were really focused on being that kind of good brewer, which was just kind of a working brewer who was learning different styles and how to manipulate different yeasts and sort of really basic fundamental stuff. And it seems like maybe in the course of the last 20 years, to a lot of older guys, this has shifted into more sort of marketing style networking, right? And sort of glomming onto whatever is happening right now and trying to do that, as opposed to, taking the time to come into the market. This happens, by the way. I think it happens less. Taking the time to come into the market and work under someone who's been doing it for a long time and really sort of apprenticing, and then sort of taking that step of journeyman, which you did in large part, and a lot of other people did by working with a lot of other brewers and learning from them, and then kind of going out on your own and saying, okay, well, now I think I'm ready to build a brewery, as opposed to saying, hey, my dad's got $300,000 and we think it'd be cool to open a brewery, so I've done a couple of homebrew batches and let's do it, right? because we know there's a game to play with regard to marketing and hype, and we can play that game. And the competitiveness is weird. I mean, we've talked about having a brewery here in Lansing near us that was really like kind of bloody knuckles type, and it just didn't make a lot of sense to me why you would do that. So I wonder if you've run across that. I know, again, being up in northern Michigan might make it a little different, but have you seen a change in brewer culture? If so, what is it? And what are the positives and negatives?
I mean, I think Wolverine was a very solitary brewery. I didn't reach out for like collaborations. I think I was so focused on how many fermenters, 24, 30 barrel fermenters which, that's a lot of small fermenters.
Yeah.
But we had height restrictions. So I definitely missed out on growth in my networking side. I would say in this area, I mean, Benzie County has Storm Cloud, Five Shores, Lake Ann Brewing, St. Ambrose, which is primarily a meadery. They do make some beer. In Traverse, you have some good breweries, and I think we all get along. But I think, the new guys that have come to the market, I feel like there's a little bit more exclusion. Like, we only go with the people who identify with, and we aren't going to be friends. The same people you see collaborating with each other all the time,
right.
Moving around, and whether or not you're cool enough to get into that crowd. I still see collaboration, not on making beer, but in sharing industry stuff and sharing, if I'm talking to a brewer from another brewer, I'm like, what'd you do here? And there's a lot of transparency with, this is the yeast, this is the process, this is what we did with our water, this is how we mashed it. I wonder, part of me thinks that people are just so busy, they don't have enough time just to sit around and do beer anymore. At least that's for me. So there's just so many breweries. I went to the Traverse City Beer Festival, the inaugural one for the Guild, and that was my first festival in a while. A lot of new breweries I'd never heard of. A lot of breweries that I didn't see that I was hoping to. I've had words with the brewers before. Everyone. What I see in the new people, how excited they are to be there. Maybe it's their first.
Nice.
Yeah, and I do remember that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Okay.
I don't know if I was ever tapped into brewer culture enough besides festivals and conferences to, commiserate and talk about trends and things that people are seeing. I think so much has shifted in Michigan with buyouts and what craft beer. I mean, the breweries that are synonymous with Michigan craft beer and how big they've gotten. I've always felt that every small brewer community would benefit from a brewery. Whether or not they can survive financially is a whole different question.
Sure.
But I think that brewer culture is kind of set. It's been around long enough that you have the old hats that came before us, then kind of our generation, and now there's a new generation that seems like it's younger guys and gals women doing some pretty interesting things and getting on the hype side. And then you also have these people that have still been homebrewing and they decide they're going to start a brewery. I mean, that's funny for me to see, is there's still guys our age or older who are just now getting into starting a brewery after having never worked in a brewery.
Right. That's what I'm talking about.
That's what blows my mind.
Right.
Is there's still a lot of mediocre beer across the United States.
Yeah. Well, and just guns blazing coming in, right? Just earplugs in, we're going to take over the world. You've never seen anything like this. We're going to teach these hippies how to do business. And you're like, dude, you're going to get fucking crushed out there, dude. Right?
Yeah. Having not looked in the mirror like a million times to say, am I doing this right? Or having some humility is a huge part of it. And I think a lot of people in the industry need to remember that being a rock star brewer is not going to make you successful.
I can think of one, right? I mean, I can think of Sam
You?
Calagione. No, fuck no. Sam Calagione, a Dogfish Head, right?
Yeah.
Can you think of any others?
I mean, Rob. I mean, they're definitely. I think that's the thing is there's so many breweries that there's these different segments of like the hype breweries where those are the people. I mean, we had the big fallout in the industry with harassment and things with women that was coming out, and that was huge. I mean, I think that did shed a good light on some issues with the brewery culture as it came up to guys, and will say guys who are using their positions as their ego and their fame in beer to take advantage of men, women primarily, and that was tough to swallow as someone who's always wanted to bring as many different people, gender, background, ethnicity into into breweries. And for Five Shores, I mean, I got lucky, but our general manager is a woman who's worked in spirits, has worked in restaurants, and I hired a young woman who she caught the brewery bug when she was like 16, visiting Rogue out in Oregon with her family, and like couldn't drink, but was like enamored by the tanks and the smells. Went to Western Michigan and KVCC and got a degree in sustainable brewing, which is an oxymoron in my mind.
That's what it is, but only for a little while, right? If you can't imagine a better future, then it becomes unimaginable.
That's true. I probably should rethink that for myself. But, and having a young woman as my head brewer is great, because I think I remember when a time when people would say, "Oh, you got a girl brewer," and like a brewer's a brewer.
Yeah, I got a brewer.
I got a brewer.
Guess what she does? She keeps the tanks full. She keeps everything clean. She does exactly what a brewer's supposed to do.
So I guess to summarize my thoughts on it is that I do think a younger generation, more diverse of brewers is something I'm seeing.
Yep.
So and I love that. I love that there are young women and people of color that are getting into beer, and it's not a unattainable industry that was once primarily white guys with beers, and it still is. It still is. Yeah. But it is growing, and I like that change.
I do too. Well, I would prefer that this went on for some time, but I'm sure have stuff to do, and so do I, unfortunately. So I guess maybe we'll do a part 2 here and get to a little bit more brewing stuff. But I think we've done a good job today, and I would love for you to wave and say goodbye to the 3 to 6 people who will experience this podcast.
I mean, I'm hoping that like my smile is enough to bring an 7th and 8th person in here.
Let's bring 7 and 8 with a smile. I think you're right. It's not creepy and it's good.
Hey, thanks you for having me on, Travis. I appreciate it, man. I love this concept for this podcast, and as a fan of podcasts, I've only been able to be on a few, but I'd love to even have a fun roundtable where everyone's talking over each other at some point.
Let's get some people together and have old men yelling at each other in clouds. That would be fantastic.
Love it.
All right, man. Hey, Oliver from Five Shores Brewing Company, thank you again. We will talk again soon, and everybody else, have a great day or evening, and we'll see you again next week.
Cheers.